All right, ELED 450 online students. Let's go ahead and talk about the final components of your lesson plan that you need to complete for your Read Aloud lesson plan assignment. This information is really not for online students. This was more for face-to-face students, so we can not worry about that too much. One thing that was noted here, though, was that the lesson plans are not due until Tuesday, which is tonight at midnight. I know that there was a delay for you having access to this lecture, however, so if you, as an online student, need more time prior or above turning this in tonight at midnight, please let me know, and I will gladly give you that extension. We'll talk about what a reasonable extension would be for you, and I'll gladly give you that because I know that you were not able to get the lecture on Friday as you were supposed to be able to. So with that being said, our learning target for this lecture is to plan the during reading, after reading, and conclosure components of a read aloud mini lesson. So how we're going to do this is we're going to talk about the places in the book that describe what you might do in further detail. How I would recommend you go about using this lecture is once we get to that chunk of time, or that chunk of the lesson, so once we start talking about the during reading lesson, I would pause this video, take some time to read the pages, then listen to what I have to say, pause again, and spend some time writing so that you get your basic ideas down, and then kind of the same procedure for once you get to the after reading section. Pause it, read the pages, listen to what I have to say about the pages, then jot that down in your lesson plan. Same with closure. So it's just kind of a, how I'm going to set this up is pause, read, listen, write, if that makes sense, is how I would recommend you go about using this lecture. The other piece of feedback I would give you as you are doing or you're working on each of these components in your lesson plan is go back to that learning target that you selected and keep checking, does what I'm writing match my learning target? Because if that's your goal or that's what you want your students to come away knowing, you want to make sure that every single part of your lesson is connecting back to that learning target. So just keep checking after you get done with the during reading lesson plan, go back and look. Does this match my learning target? So if your learning target was the students will be able to answer who, what, when, where, why, how about a story, go back and see, did you accomplish that in your during reading lesson plan so that the students will be able to accomplish that in their independent work time. So your first section, and this is where you should pause, but go ahead and take some time to read the during reading suggestions. So that would be pages 92 to 94. It's called the active involvement phase from your book. So pause now, read pages 92 to 94, get a feel for what the authors of our textbook say, and then I will provide you some insight. Okay, so some things that stuck out to me with the active involvement phase or the during reading phase of your lesson plan, it's really in the second line, one of the most telling pieces of information about this phase. It says telling is not teaching. I think that's really important to remember. If we want students to be able to actively take something and use it, we need to give them time to practice. I will never forget a coworker of mine back when I taught middle school. Bless his heart, he was a wonderful man, but he thought telling was teaching. So he would get so frustrated when his students weren't successful, and he would say things like, "I wrote it on the board. It was right there on the board. I told them in class. I don't understand why they're getting this wrong." He wasn't giving them the opportunity to try it out on their own, talk about it a little bit, figure it out, practice it before he was expecting them to get it right. So whether you're teaching science or social studies or reading or math or history or art or gym, telling is not teaching. Students need time to practice. So one of the things that I like to think about in this chunk of the lesson plan is kind of like, how can I scaffold students' learning? So I always think of I do, you do, we do. So I'm going to model it. so in your lesson plan, if you're going to start reading, how might you model who, what, when, where, why, how, if that's your learning target for your students? What might you say to them? And when I say model, it's essentially exposing the voice in your head. What are you thinking in your head in terms of the what you're looking for students to say that aloud to students, right? So you're actually modeling it for them. So that's the I do. Watch me do it. I'm going to show you how I do it. Then it's we do. So you stop after a point in your book and you say, okay, I want you to think about it. I want you to turn and talk with a neighbor, or I want you to brainstorm on a piece of paper, however you think is best for whatever it is you're doing. But then come back and talk about it and provide them immediate feedback in a class discussion. And then finally, when you release them to independent work time, that would be the you do, where they're practicing it on their own. But if they see the I do, so they see you modeling, they get a chance for we do, so they're actively involved in the learning target and practicing, then you do is much more likely to happen. So the students are much more likely to practice this. So during this lesson, part of the lesson plan, I would expect to see page numbers, specific parts of the book that you're going to draw students' attention to that you're reading aloud, and then either what you'll model, or so what you'll say to the students in terms of what you'll model, or what you will ask them to get them to practice with the we do chunk of your lesson plan. So just keep in mind, I do, you do, we do, specific page numbers, specific examples as to what you're going to say to students so that you give them that opportunity to be actively involved. They give some really great examples, or one really great example on page 94. It says we tend to do this. It says, would you get with your partner? I'm going to continue reading. So they're doing a read aloud. As you listen, carry with you an awareness of the setting, colonial America in 1790, perhaps in Massachusetts colony. When I pause, talk to your partner about how your knowledge of the setting informs your understanding. So they're letting them practice with a partner so they have some support. Is what they're doing, and they're setting a stage. They know what they should be thinking about in order to successfully understand the strategy or the target they're trying to reach for the day. So go ahead now, pause this, take some time to think about how are you going to actively involve your students in this read aloud mini lesson and put it in this chunk of your lesson plan. All right, so hopefully that was successful for you and you're feeling like you're ready to go to the after reading chunk of your lesson plan or section of your lesson plan. The first thing I want you to do is read pages 94 to 96. This is going to talk about the link of your lesson plan, or essentially the off you go. So this is getting your students ready for the you do. You've practiced the I do, we do, so you've modeled for them. They've practiced in their small groups. So the you do, to set them up for that, you need to remind them of what the learning target is. And so in our book, they call this the link or the off you go phase of the mini lesson. I want you to, like I said, pause this at this point and read pages 94 to 96 to get an idea of how you will do this. Some things that stand out to me about this chunk of the mini lesson is that it's essential to remind them of what the target is and what the strategy is. And then it's also essential to check in with your students and make sure they understand. Now, there are a couple of ways to go about this. A more traditional reading teacher might give them a worksheet to fill out. So who, what, when, where, why, how, as they're reading their independent reading book. Absolutely fine, but not necessarily always needs to be done. You can also allow students to read independently and give them the opportunity to use this, because depending upon their independent reading book, it may or may not fit exactly with what they're doing at that point today. So some examples of what the author says, they might say is, can I have a few volunteers who will use this strategy today? Will you three plan to bring what you do to share meetings? So they're setting that up ahead of time. Okay, so you're going to try this out. Great. Will you share how this worked for you in share meetings? So that allows some students to volunteer if they really feel like they get this. Or another option might be, if you do this, come and get me. I want to hear how it went for you. So if you notice that you're doing this in your independent reading today, let me know. And then that would be something that you would also bring to share time. Let's see. In conferences, it says that we help children reach their goals, which is often unrelated to that day's mini lesson. But you could also say, could you use any of these strategies we talked about recently to help you with this? Or as a teacher, when the students are doing their independent work time and you are conferencing with individual students, you might draw their attention to what you practiced in the mini lesson, depending on if they need more support, or that would help them with understanding their reading that day. But essentially, it's just important to remember that you're hoping that students will practice this strategy, and you're also hoping to build their repertoire of strategies to help them understand what they read. So for these two chunks of the mini lesson, they're fairly similar. This is going to be your link or your off you go statement essentially, and that you're going to just briefly explain what you expect the students to do. And then here in the student work time, which in terms of time frame, if you're thinking about the mini lesson, the introduction is going to be a couple minutes. The before and during reading will probably add up to 10 to 15 minutes, but the student work time is going to end up being probably about 20 to 30 minutes with a 5 to 10 minute closure at the end. So you think about what you're asking the students to do and what would be an appropriate amount of time, fill in the time frame, but then describe what you're expecting students to do here. If you're expecting them to do a worksheet, fine, then describe it and maybe even put a brief example of what it would look like in here. If you're expecting students to simply read independently, describe what you hope that they're going to be doing as they read independently. Another important and helpful thing to include in this section is what will you be doing as their teacher. So will you be meeting with small groups, or will you be conferring? And in this case, probably you'll be conferring with students about their independent reading, and what might be some of your key questions that you're going to ask students while you confer. So go ahead and pause the video at this point and stop and fill in your ideas for after reading and student work time. Okay, so now we are on to closure. It says to read pages 96 to 99, but I think you really get the gist of this by reading just page 96, that small paragraph called the follow-up. So go ahead and pause and read about the follow-up. So with the follow-up, it says we reinforce and extend the mini lesson at the end of the day's workshop by gathering all the students together in a share meeting. Now, this is one of the hardest things for teachers to get to when you actually start doing it, because you lose track of time. However, I would argue that it's probably one of the most important components of your mini lesson, because it does two things. It makes students accountable for your learning, and it allows you to refresh the student's memory on the learning target and help them to self-assess if they met the target, and help you to assess if your students have met the target or if they need more work. It helps drive what you're going to do tomorrow. So this closure is really important to make sure that you get to. Some examples that they talk about, you could do it one of two ways. First of all, you could ask a question and make it a little bit more open-ended. Who tried what we talked about today? How did it work for you? Will you explain this so that your classmates can understand what it did to help you understand your reading? Alternately, you could, as you were conferencing with students, select some students that you know were successful with the strategy and invite them to share in the whole group. So during your conference, you would say, okay, Bobby, you did this and it was so awesome. I could tell you were really meeting the target today. Could you please share what you did with your classmates? So then when it gets time to meet in the share meeting, that person will raise their hand, or you can call on them just immediately and have them share. But that will help provide students with another example of modeling how that strategy is useful. And maybe after you have a couple of specific students share their thinking, other students that maybe aren't so confident would be willing to raise their hand and share how it worked for them as well, providing you with an assessment opportunity for other students. So go ahead and pause and write your closure for the lesson. In terms of time frame, this should be 5 to 10 minutes. So not super long, but enough time to give students the opportunity to bring closure to this section of their learning. So once you finish writing that chunk of your lesson plan, it will be complete. There are some things that we're going to add the next time we write lesson plans. So anything highlighted in yellow, you do not need to include in your lesson plan. One of the things I would recommend doing, there's a lesson plan rubric in week 5 on D2L. Self-assess using that lesson plan rubric and use that to make any edits or changes prior to submitting. And then remember to turn it into the Dropbox by Tuesday at midnight, or if you feel like you need extended time based on the lateness of being able to watch this lecture, shoot me an email and we'll talk about a time that you can turn that in that's reasonable for you. So with that being said, good luck on your read aloud lesson plan writing. Let me know if you have questions, and have a great Tuesday.